Hello and welcome to the second panel discussion of the Ethical Commerce Alliance. We're here today in Berlin, Germany, at our partners' office for you and your customers who kindly let us be in their beautiful office space. Thank you so much for having us, and special thanks to Fabian Engeln for making it all happen. The Ethical Commerce Alliance is our new initiative at Empathy. It is based on our core principles of trust, understanding, and joy, and we believe the future of digital commerce is private, should be private, has to be private, and this is why we're here today to make a stand and discuss how to make it better, how to make the online world safer. Consequently, today's discussion is called Cookies, Consent, and Privacy Violations. With me today are three wonderful guests, which I'd like to introduce you to. Here inside with me is Dr. Daniel Guagnin. He's the head of research group Network and Society at the Nexus Institute for Corporation Management and Interdisciplinary Research. He's also a consultant of privacy and technology assessment. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
Joining us remotely, two wonderful women, which I'm really excited about. Hailing from Luxembourg is Katja Rausch, the founder of the House of Ethics, a platform to exchange on questions around ethics in data, medicine, and business. Katja has more than 15 years of experience as a teacher at the Sorbonne in Paris. She's also a business consultant on ethics in new technologies and businesses for large corporations like Nestlé France and Cartier. And thirdly, I'm thrilled to welcome Carissa Véliz. She's an associate professor in philosophy at the Institute of Ethics and AI, a fellow at Hartford College at the Oxford University. Her research focus lies in privacy, ethics of AI, political philosophy, and public policy. Carissa is also the author of Privacy is Power. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nina Müller. I'm leading the Ethical Commerce Alliance at Empathy. And let's get started. Privacy is always personal. It's not only a set of data to identify you with by your name, your address, your credit card details, your date of birth, and so on. In the offline world, that is pretty easy to take in. We see each other, we communicate with each other as human beings. In the online world, there's a lot of space for improvement to go away from this seeing us as a mere data set, but taking on and protecting our identity a lot better and protecting our privacy. So we already heard an opening talk that we will publish online later too by Daniel. Thank you again for that. It was titled Privacy Beyond Minimal Compliance. My very first question, Katja, is for you. Beyond minimal compliance, for businesses, what does that mean if we look beyond the front end of an online shop, for example? What does it mean for businesses in terms of their work structures, how they work together as people?
Well, you mentioned beyond minimal compliance. I would answer very clearly, you need to have maximal ethical standards. And by ethics, I don't mean norms, because ethics is not about norms. Ethic is about who we are, how we act. It's an actional philosophy. It's systemic thinking, like you said, Daniel, in your wonderful presentation. And when we have two systems, thinking systems, clashing, the business system, which is problem-solving system, and the ethical system, which is a perspective-generating system. You have two systems clashing. And the problem is that most people call it complex, but in real, they are confused. When Heinz von Förster was asked to talk about in the 90s about second-order cybernetics and ethics, he said, "Oh, I'm very glad you asked me to talk about second-order cybernetics, because it's very hard to talk about ethics, to align ethics with with business purposes. And business purposes in a data-driven world means privacy. It is personal, like you said, Nina, it is personal to us, and ethic is the most personal core we have. It's about our bias, our way of living.
Thank you, Katja. Anyone would like to comment or elaborate on that for now?
Sure. I think Katja is absolutely right. I completely agree. And I think also when we're online, there is this effect of remoteness. We all know, like on social media, it's easier to say things than you would in person. And then people say things that can be quite outrageous. And I think the same kind of effect happens with companies. When you used to be a business owner and you used to see your customers and have to deal with them and call them by name and kind of get a sense of them being of blood and flesh and blood, it was easier to be respectful. It was easier to see the more humane side. And now we are just data points in this screen, and that creates a kind of distance that we have to bridge somehow. And the way to bridge it is with ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe let me add, like I outlined in the talk, that if we're thinking of ethics, it's important to think of or to discuss what we mean with ethics. And if we think of data points and data subjects, that it's important to protect the individuals and their fundamental rights. By a systemic view, and not only by allowing them to take individual measures to protect themselves. So, like the example I made up in the talk, you couldn't participate. So let me outline that again in short. I made a comparison with a traffic system, that it's not enough to allow people to wear a helmet. To save them before getting injured by a truck. It's more important to regulate the way in how trucks, for instance, can use the streets, that it's possible for people to be a pedestrian without a helmet. So this just not to focus on privacy measures on an individualistic level, but to get a bigger view on ethical, systemic, systems. Yeah, let's say. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. That's a fantastic analogy, and I'm really sorry I had to miss your talk. The way I phrase it in my book is that privacy is as collective as it is personal. So I think it's misleading to think about personal data and then infer that it's something very individualistic. Actually, privacy is a collective enterprise, and it's as important because of politics as it is to protect the individual.
Well, if you go back to the etymology of privatus from Latin, it means you are going out of the office, out of office. So even if you're private, you still belong to a bigger societal or corporate organization. You are always on three levels, on the micro, meso, and macro level. And that's why I like Carissa also with your view. And the title of your book is very telling. You say privacy is power. You go beyond the data point. And you, Daniel, you said you illustrated it by saying the truck driver is also a pedestrian. You go beyond. It's always to go beyond. That's important for businesses. They have to go beyond supply chains. They have to go beyond data flow. They have to go beyond purpose, business purposes. That's why we are talking about ESG. We are talking about corporate social responsibility. We need to go beyond business. We need to go beyond privacy and understand what the stakes are, what it really means.
Exactly, but this also has a lot to do with taking on responsibility and seeing this as your responsibility as a company within society, beyond your responsibility of making a profit and making the economy thrive. There's a lot more at stake, especially today, now in the online world and with the pandemic, who accelerated online shopping so much. I would like to go on and talk a bit about what Daniel shed some light on behavioral advertisement in online, in manipulation, in behavioral patterns. In the offline world, that is not new to try to influence or encourage people into a certain behavior. For instance, when we go to a supermarket and which are designed in a certain way to make us go through all the aisles and to buy a lot more things and pricier things than we actually intended to. But still, everybody who goes there gets to see the same products, the same items at the same price. In the online world, this can be a lot different. And Daniel, maybe you can elaborate on this and explain a bit the how and why and how our personal data comes into play here.
Yeah, on the one hand, as you said, the example of going out of office, in understanding what is private or what is privacy. If in the moment when I have a personal device which is connected all the time and which is containing all my information, I don't have differences between my roles anymore, or at least it is possible to track every context I move back to the same ID, let's say. So in that understanding, there is no way of going out because the times when you went offline are long ago. It's over. You could say there's no such life as offline life anymore. And on the other hand, as you mentioned, the supermarket example, it's not that you can perfectly trace how people work around in the online supermarket. It's also that you can manipulate instantly prices, or that you even can just hide products, which, I mean, you might know that sometimes you're looking in a supermarket for the equivalent, which is a bit cheaper, and in the online world you just can fade it out. It's not visible anymore to you. So here comes into place the possibilities of defining the virtual space, and this is here you have much more differences than in the online space. You can very individually adapt the whole room in which you are living, like if you think of the Matrix, which is coming out now, the next movie. It's fascinating. You can just change the world you're moving in, just targeted on your very personal, or what some algorithm thinks what your personality is.
Can anyone say a little more about that in terms of the search results that I'm shown and the intended or unintended consequences that might come with that?
Well, I mean, like Daniel said, it is, well, when I started out after the Sorbonne, I was hired by Young & Rubicam, which is a world leading advertising company, agency. And I was working in strategic planning. And of course, in strategic planning, you have to deal with decoding the competitors and benchmarking and decoding strategies and encoding new strategies. And what Daniel just described is that nowadays we have to deal with different identities. We have online identities, we have offline identities. And this is going to reshape the advertising world. And that's what we are seeing right now. And it needs for businesses to look on how to treat their customers, because you will treat them differently on the offline in a shop than you will treat them online. And you need to find a symbiosis between the two. because you have a digital twin, which might be completely different from your own self. And that's what you said, Danielle. You said you can design your virtual space, business space, corporate space, but I can design my virtual identity as well. So maybe fake and fake will get real. Who knows?
Yeah, again, I completely agree with Katja and Daniel. And maybe one way to put it is that we are losing equality of opportunity. Because if we are treated on the basis of our data, we are not being treated as equal citizens anymore. And what does that say about society? What implications does that have for democracy, for how we interact with each other, and so on? It's much more serious than it looks. When you look at it on the surface, you just think, oh, well, the internet is just recommending what I want and what I like. And it sounds very innocuous. But when you redescribe it and realize that you're not being treated as an equal citizen anymore, then it takes on a whole different light.
That's right. I would like to ask the Data Act. That's very recent. And it deals with data sharing. It deals with, apparently, sovereignty. But whose sovereignty?
Exactly. That is the question.
That's the question.
And when, Daniel, Carissa, do you want to share your thoughts on whose sovereignty?
I mean, maybe, following up the question of, what is the goal of, for whom do you design the space? If you have, I mean, you said you're losing opportunities in the virtual space, for instance, but this is a kind of perspective because there could be so many opportunities in the virtual space, but it's the question on whose benefit you focus. If you focus on the benefit of business, for instance, to frame it strictly, or do you benefit of the good of people? I mean, and then it comes again to the ethical questions. What is what we need? Do we want to consume more? Do you want assistance all around helping us? I mean, that's not the baddest idea to get assistance, but the question is, what is the logic behind and whom serves this logic? So to keep in mind to keep the human interest or I think I made my point.
Yeah. So traditionally, at least in philosophy, we talk of sovereignty when we talk about the state. The state is the sovereign. And when it comes to human beings, the term that is more usually used is autonomy. And there is a very close relationship between privacy and autonomy. So in order to be autonomous, to be somebody who can self-govern, to be somebody who can make good decisions about your own life, there are certain requirements to be made, including that you have certain values, that you are able to figure out what kind of actions will lead you to the kind of life that you want. And for that, you have to be somewhat well-informed. And the way that the online world works at the moment leaves us very much uninformed. We know we are giving up our data all the time, but even if you read all the privacy policies that you interact with, which you can't because you have a job, but even if you did, and even if you understand, which you don't because most people are not lawyers, even then you wouldn't actually know what happens with your data because privacy policies are notoriously vague. So somebody telling you that your data is being sold to third parties doesn't really tell you much about what is being done with your data, who has it, and how is it going to affect your life when you ask for a loan, when you ask for a job, when you look for an apartment, and in those ways and more, the privacy erosions are really undermining our autonomy.
Oh, I completely agree with that, and one really it just struck me the other day. One really I would say main industry which is flying completely under the radar of privacy, is the automotive industry.
Yep.
Imagine we will have in 2035, we will have 2 billion cars in the world. Each car is a driving computer. Everything will be collected. If you drive fast, you drive slow, you turn around, you go from this point to that point, you need to change your fuel, you are listening this kind of music while driving. So everything is interconnected. You are driving in a computer. And this is an industry which has been notoriously privacy resistant. We don't realize it. That's what you say. We are not aware of it. Even though we sit within our computer, we just send an enormous mass of data, personal data this time, also non-personal data, to Citroën, to Tesla, to any kind of, to Porsche, to Audi. And we are kind of unaware how naked we are. And there are, and that's why, Carissa, to go back to that we all live in certain bubbles. We also live in an ethical bubble. I feel it. Because ethics right now is extremely biased. And we, as you see, and biased means lack of information, lack of diversity, lack of seeing the whole picture. And this is what companies need, a panoptical view. You need to see beyond your supply chain. You need to see on the value chain.
Yes, thank you.
Get out of the bubble.
Yes, and I think not only the supply chain or the value chain, but ethical issues and privacy protecting involve so many different stakeholders. Carissa, you mentioned it at the beginning, early on, that lawyers are involved, legal frameworks, but then the technological view, the engineers, the developers, to bring them all together takes a lot to get this complete picture that you were talking about, Katja. In this slide, Carissa, in your book, you talk about power asymmetries. Can you comment on that and explain a bit more what you mean by that?
Sure, thank you. So I think one of the reasons why we've been misled so much and been so confused about data is because we have been thinking about data in terms of money. And of course, data is valuable and you can sell it. But it's even more important to think of data in terms of power, because it's not until we talk about power that all the relationships between the citizenry and companies and governments really kind of become salient. So I think Katja's example of the car is a fantastic one. In the 1990s, it used to be the case that if you paid for a car, that car was yours. It did what you told it to do. So you wanted to go someplace and the car drove you there and you drove the car, but and that was it. That was the relationship, that was the contract, and it was very, very clear. Today, when you buy a car, first of all, it's not clear that you really own it. If the company can shut it down because, from afar, if it changes the software, it's not clear that it was yours in the first place. It's also not clear that it works for you. So even if you paid for it, the car is doing things that you're not asking it to do, that you don't understand what it's doing, and that many times work against you. So if, say, the car is tracking your weight, which it is, and say it sends that information to your insurance company, who then makes your premium higher, your car, which you are supposed to own and which you paid for, is working against you and for other people. And that is insane. From the point of view of the 1990s, it's just kind of unimaginable. And it shows how users, who at the end of the day are citizens or are supposed to be citizens, are losing power over their world they inhabit. We don't even know the rules of the world we inhabit. We don't even know how things are going to affect very important things like asking for a job or a loan. And that shows that the relationship between knowledge and power is still very, very strong, and one that we have to be very mindful of. So one of the things I suggest is that these power asymmetries come partly out of a knowledge asymmetry. So what we need to do is on the one hand, learn a lot more about how data works and what these companies are doing with our data and who they are and all of the details. But on the other hand, we have to make sure that they know a lot less about us, because the only way to be sure that you're not being, for instance, or your political affiliation is if you can make sure that those companies don't have that information in the first place.
And do you,
Yes,
in the light of
that's right.
Okay. Go on.
Look what has happened. Two cases. Apple changed its privacy policy. Everybody thought it would be a disaster. What happened? Only 24% of Apple's customers opted in. 75% opted out because they were informed of what was happening with their data. And then the smart people said, oh, the market's going to crash, the stock's going to fall and drop. The only stock that was dropping was Meta's, Facebook's. They lost 10 billion. Apple, on the contrary, for Apple, privacy was very beneficial. They had a 10% raise in revenue and 20% raise in profit. So inform people and not just inform it, but keep to it, act upon it. Not be transparently, that's what we call in ethics the ethical signaling. You just do as if. But here you act upon it. And what you said, Carissa, that it is linked to risk industries like insurance or loans, and that you are eligible or not eligible, I think it is right out fully criminal. It is not even an asymmetry. It is unlawful. It has nothing to do with ethics anymore. It's unlawful.
In the light of the core example that it is not ours anymore, and that we do not know who's collecting or in a hold of our data anymore, and the willingness to give away our data, do you think, maybe Katja and Carissa, you know that from your teaching experiences, that if younger generations, digital natives, who grew up with that, have either a higher awareness to protect their data and to stand in for the privacy, a higher demand for that, or on the other hand, is there more willingness to share and give away personal data in order to be able to take part in social life, online or offline, for example, in taking part in social media? What do you think? Anyone? Or Daniel, of course, this question is also for you. Whoever likes to take that.
Maybe shortly, I think it's always a question how you introduce them into the topics, and this might be very different in different contexts or milieus. So I think this is something we also need to take into account for the education that we teach people, how socio-technical systems work, how they are designed, and how you put out traces there, and how this can affect your daily behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, 5 years back, when I started the first data ethics class actually in France, in a private school, a business school, and I was shocked. These were youngsters, 24, 25, data analysts, master students. And I was talking about collecting the data lifetime cycle, collecting data, storing data, processing data, disseminating data, to see where all the different ethical issues in this entire cycle would be. And then I asked them to choose companies, read the policies, and come back to me. But before I asked them about the trust, how much they trusted them. Before, the trust was 8, 9 to 10. After reading the policy, after talking together, sharing everything in class, the trust was reassessed to 4, 3, and 4, which means that even though they were using all the apps, they didn't know that if you use Facebook, you are sharing with Booking, you are sharing with TripAdvisor, you are sharing with... They weren't aware of that third-party data sharing, and they were shocked too. So we were all shocked. And this is what educating is about, and what we do is about. We need to talk about it in easy terms. Not education, but educating, informing, like you said, Carissa, with easy examples. And especially for the tracking industry. Imagine yourself walking in the city, you enter a bakery, you come out, and the employee is following you. You go to the next shop, to the butcher, you buy a piece of poultry, you get out, and this employee is following you too. You go to 10 different shops, you have 10 more people following you. In real life, we would be horrified. What are you doing? All this line behind us.
Yeah, it sounds very creepy
and tracking is. Yes, it is.
And ridiculous. But yeah, that's what tracking is.
Ridiculous. That's what's happening. Footprinting, fingerprinting on the internet. That's exactly what's happening.
Yes.
And I think we need to educate people about that.
And do you think cookie banners help there, or are a hindrance, or make it more difficult? Where's your stake? This question is for everyone again.
It's a nuisance.
Yeah, I don't think they're very helpful because, first of all, they're very time consuming. So I spend like half my day saying no to cookies.
Exactly.
But secondly, they're not very informative in that,
Right.
They don't make salient all these relationships that we have been talking about. So I agree with Katja that part of our job is to visibilize what's invisible. And there are very good reasons for why people don't know about this. Companies have a very high interest, and governments, in people not knowing. And so we have to kind of counter that. And one of my concerns with young people is that we are raising subjects rather than citizens. And I worry that they're missing out on a very important phase of life in which you go from being a child to being a teenager to being an adult. And you go from having to be supervised because you don't know your way around the world to not having to be supervised. And in a world in which we are always supervised, always surveilled, I worry that young people are going to grow up to be very conservative and always worried about how is this going to look, and should I even search for this online? Should I even think about these things or talk about these things? And when you're a teenager, you have to explore the world. You have to be willing to make mistakes and kind of make a fool of yourself. But if you know that every time you make a mistake, it's going to be recorded and it will be used against you in the future, you're going to be much more afraid than if you lived 40 years ago or 50 years ago, and you had the sense that mistakes weren't that big a deal because they weren't recorded. You could move past them. So I worry about what surveillance is doing to our psychology in general for everyone, but to young people in particular.
Can I just ask one thing? What Carissa says, because she's talking about the psychological impact technology has on us, and especially youngsters. And even in companies, within companies I have been working for, people tend to overestimate technology and underestimate themselves. And that's, with youngsters, a huge problem. You ask them, what are your values? They Google values, Wikipedia, and you have a list of values. And you find family, you find respect, you find collaborative working. And this is very damageable. Yes, we are laughing, but I actually did this experiment, and that's what happened. And I was flabbergasted because I said, don't use your phones, don't use the computers. Just tell me, what are your personal own values? It's an easy question. Well, it's not an easy question, but it's your personal question. You don't need a computer for that. Still, they were going back for answers to the computer, and we talked about it. I asked them, why? They said, well, we wanted to be sure that these were values. Overestimating, underestimating.
I mean, the interesting thing, coming back to the cookie banners, is that the technology of the banners could be a tool to tell people what's happening, to illustrate people what tracking is done behind the surface. But it becomes so clear that no one does want to accept this. So that's quite interesting, because you have the powerful technology option to illustrate people what happens. But what you do is you hide it again. And so again, it's the question how you use it. What's your intention? For whom do you optimize the technology? Do you optimize it for the individuals, for the citizens' interests, or for the interests of getting more information about them to do whatever you want? And on the other side, it's interesting that people like me get trained to overcome their intuition, because now I always, if I see a big green button, I'm looking for another button where I can put something else.
Small grey font.
Especially. I mean, it's a long story that buttons were grey if you couldn't click them. I mean, it's like Windows 95 and even before. And now it's the gray button which has no function, which you need to find to opt out.
Yeah, exactly. Carissa, you also mentioned that you spend half your day saying no to cookies. It's tedious, and I do that too, and a lot more. Growing over time, and I have a lot higher awareness now. But what can we do to regain power? Then clicking away cookies is one thing, but there's always a lot to read on that, and it's tedious, like you say, to find the right not button that says reject all, and sometimes even the web says then don't work properly anymore. But what, from a consumer perspective, easy fixes, what can be done to browse safely on the internet?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I just wanted to add on. That can't be the solution, that people opt out, and that's also not the solution how it's intended in the data protection law.
No.
It's just the dirty workaround to convince people or to
Absolutely, this is not the solution, but this is the situation we are currently dealing with. So for now, to work around that, a safe way to work around until we have found better solutions and better ways to deal with it, and more educated ways, more protective ways to deal with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And going back to Daniel's very eloquent analogy, this is like traffic mayhem. And we're going to wear helmets so that we don't break our skulls. But it's never going to be really safe because you're in the middle of tractors who are not regulated. So the things that you can do, and I think what motivates me the most is not only that I might actually protect my privacy, which maybe sometimes it works, but also that resisting surveillance has a very important expressive function. And that expressive function, on the one hand, motivates companies to realize that privacy can be a competitive advantage, and it also gives tools to policymakers to do their job and regulate for privacy. But things that you can do are cultivate a culture of privacy. So every time you get a choice, try to choose privacy without going crazy. You don't have to be perfect. As long as you have that kind of resistance, it creates a huge effect. So never buy a phone from a company that earns its keep through the selling of personal data, because they will always have a conflict of interest. Choose platforms that are privacy friendly. So instead of using WhatsApp, use Signal. Instead of using Gmail, use ProtonMail. Instead of using Google search, use DuckDuckGo or StartPage or some other alternative. Don't violate other people's privacy, so don't retweet or resend messages that clearly violate somebody's privacy. If you want to have a really good academic debate, turn off the cameras and microphones. If you want to have a really nice, intimate dinner with friends, ask them not to bring their phones, or to certainly not to take them out, or to record anything or upload anything, and so on and so forth. And just do what you can without making your life impossible.
I just would like to add, look, how absurd is it when we think about it? We are debating, and the world is debating, on finding some good facets to wrongdoing. It simply is not okay to be tracked. So why should we applaud when Google, the privacy sandbox, which is a joke, it's a marketing sandbox, is actually pitching something positive while doing something bad? It's like you slap somebody in the face and you say your technique was nice. It is wrong to slap. It is wrong to track. And yet, we are in this bubble where we say, well, they do it nicely. It shouldn't be done at all.
So I also want to add on that. I appreciate the idea that every individual can change the social structure by taking action, and probably that's a good way to try to do what you can on your individual level. But it's also important to bring data protection law into effect. Like, for instance, none of your business tries to get a case on bad cookie banners. And finally, it's also important, beside the individualistic approach and the regulation approach, that companies think about how they can do it better. I mean, it's always good to have a regulation, but it's also good to do what you can and to go beyond the minimal compliance and take your customers serious. And for instance, do not target. I mean, there are also possibilities to advertise in the context of certain topics, which is much less invasive. And the other thing is that I always like to question if the paradigm of targeted advertising is really needs to be the gold standard, or if it could be questioned. If you think that if you target people who are interested in something, that they are probably more likely to buy it, but if you wouldn't advertise the product, they might buy it anyway because they are interested in the product. So it's clear that targeted advertising has a high conversion rate, but if it's really that effective, can be questioned, I'd say.
I think that's a great point. There's so much dogma around targeted advertising, and every piece of solid evidence we have, and that means evidence that's not conducted by a company, shows us that actually targeted advertising isn't that effective. So it's effective enough that you can improve sales for about 4%, but they're so expensive that expense isn't actually worth it. So it's incredible that we have all this system and we're giving up all this data for nothing. And not only that, it's a financial liability because there are worries that there's so much fraud within this industry because it's so opaque. So if you buy an ad from a newspaper and you go to the street and buy the newspaper, you can check whether the ad is there and you can check whether people are seeing it. But with personalized ads, you can't do that because they're personalized. So there's a huge amount of fraud. And there is a worry that we're actually in a bubble, and that when advertisers realize that they've been paying these huge amounts of money for ads that actually don't work or sometimes aren't even shown, it's going to come crashing down and it's going to create a financial crisis similar to the one in 2008. And by the way, the same people who created the market of subprime mortgages were the same people who created this market for real-time bidding and personalized ads. So that should make us think twice and kind of be suspect. And I completely agree with Daniel that companies have an incentive to look to privacy, not only because it's a way to respect their customers, to gain trust, to be trustworthy, and because it's a competitive advantage, but also because every company that has a data point, a personal data point that they don't need, they are creating their own risk. They are becoming their own biggest risk. Every personal data point that you don't need is a potential lawsuit, a potential leak. It's a liability. And it's like you have a ticking bomb. And if you if you have like a long-term view of your company, what you would want to do is to get rid of it as soon as possible, not store it.
No, thank you,
But that's
Carissa.
That's the difference between the industry, the advertising industry, which is a short-term, high revenue, and highly discriminating industry. Because if you target, you exclude. So we should think really about that. And businesses have to think about surgical, targeted advertising. It had been around, I started in digital marketing. So that's what we did. We were profiling, categorizing, linking revenues to frequencies, to monetary expenses. So it has been around for 40 years. The only thing that has changed is that it's on a bigger, larger scale, and it is mass individualization. But the idea is the same. Money, money, money.
Yeah, so to recap, I think the effort to make it better, to come up with better ideas and more sustainable and protective solutions it has to be a joint effort of industry, of businesses, of individuals, of activists like None of Your Business, and of academia. But that is, it sounds easy, but I think it sounds a lot easier than it is done. But bringing these together, all this very different perspective, and needs and requirements and wants. Money, 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 like you said, Katja, is always a big factor. Is a huge effort. When I remember when GDPR was put in place, it was a very long and tedious process, and now and with what result that we have, just covering what really is the baseline, the basic human rights. What can we learn from that process? How can we make it better?
One thing we can learn.
Go on.
One thing we can learn is that we need privacy by default. That we can't put everything on the shoulders of individuals.
No.
And wait for them to either agree or disagree with cookie banners. I'm frozen. Am I frozen to you?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
To me, yes.
Okay. As long as I'm not frozen to Nina, I'll keep going.
Please go ahead.
But I think the GDPR was the best thing we could come up with at the time. It's not that regulators didn't see these problems. It's that the lobbying was so hard that this was the best that they could get done. And before the GDPR, even a year before the GDPR, most people I knew thought something like the GDPR was absolutely out of the question, impossible. So I think we should be very ambitious. We should think about the kind of society we want. And of course it's going to be difficult. Nothing is ever simple. But here are two reasons to be optimistic. The first one is that we've managed to regulate every industry that has come before. Cars, planes, trains, food, drugs, financial system. Some of them we've managed to regulate better than others. But there's no reason why this new industry is any different. And secondly, most of our greatest achievements at some point seem absolutely impossible, like having 8-hour shifts and maternity and paternity leave and holidays and so many other things that go against, the money, money, money approach. And that nevertheless, we managed to do that. And now it's absolutely normal. So we have to be ambitious.
Yes, I think we have. I agree. Katja, Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, look what happened. You were mentioning the GDPR. GDPR was the 25th of May 2018. Now we are 4 years later. What do we have? The European data landscape has completely changed. We went out of the Privacy Shield. Schrems 2 is there. We got a Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act. We have the Data Governance Act, recently the Data Act. I think it is very ambitious, what we are doing in Europe. So we do have the macro level that is going in a protective direction. I don't even use the word protectionist, but protective direction. And this makes us feel good. I have many friends and colleagues in the US, and they kind of admire us. We also have, on an individual basis, we are talking about this language, copy-paste language that we see in the cookies. We don't like it anymore. We don't want it anymore. If the customer doesn't want it anymore, well, things will change, can change, and because we use it. So it is really, we are at the crossroads, I think, of positive change. I honestly believe that, because so many wheels started to turn simultaneously. And the malevolent approach of technology, which I actually don't agree with, because technology is not malevolent per se. It's how you use it. So we need to get it into a benevolent approach again, that it's helpful, that it brings us something, that you, like you said, Carissa, it helps, or Daniel, it helps us to meet again who we really are and what we really are for our future, not Google's future, not Facebook's future, but la condition humaine, the human conditions future. And that's about ethics.
Let me shortly reiterate the point Carissa made. The lobbying, I think, is a very big instrument in regulation. I mean, if you watch the movie about Jan Philipp Albrecht and the data protection regulation, process, it's very it's impressive how they got lobbied from different sides. So to put forward a stronger focus on the interests of citizens, it might be a way to restrict lobbying, or even to put forward more participative approaches. Like, for instance, in the climate area, you have Bürgerräte, it's in German. You have citizen boards where people are selected and they are informed, and they try to find better solutions without lobbying. So I think that there are many ways to improve legislative processes.
That's such a good point, and that's such a good movie. If I remember correctly, it's called Democracy. Highly recommended. And I think you're absolutely right. We should limit the power of lobbyists. But something that's really interesting is that what has changed now with respect to when the GDPR was passed is that when the GDPR was passed, the citizenry wasn't in on it. It's like that was just policymakers who knew what the right thing to do was, kind of pushing for citizens, but citizens being completely oblivious. And now citizens are not oblivious. Citizens are angry. They realize that we're being exploited, that we've been lied to for years, and that gives policymakers a lot more power in the face of lobbying, even though I agree that lobbying is still a problem.
Katja, any comments?
Well, lobbying has always been around. It's a question of how you use your power, how powerful you are, how much money you have. It's unfortunately endemic. And we always try to be better, to be more intelligent, to speak smarter, that's a kind of lobbying. Even in ethics, you have lobbying. You have the right position, you have the right answer, but I don't really believe that. Look at the committees, the steering committees, even on the European level. If you look at their composition, you have many. It's not very diverse, let's say it at least like this. And it has been from the inside, from the people who are on these committees, on these think tanks, have regretted that it is very biased. And that's why it's, I'm very positive about the fact that small is the new big. It matters what we all do on an individual level. It matters how we talk. It matters when we are consulting business executives. It matters to say no. It matters. That's why it's all, if you allow me to, because Daniel, in your presentation at the beginning, you were talking about compliance. There is a big difference between compliance and ethics. I completely think that compliance, people working in compliance, should be part of the company. It should come from within because it's closer to law, to regulations, to sanctions and punishments. Whereas ethical people, I honestly believe, should be outside of a company. They should be independent. And what we see is that the big companies are ramping up their army of ethical experts. So, but how, that's also a kind of lobbying on ethics. But I honestly believe that to avoid ethics, one needs to have the courage to sometimes say no. And it starts with us. Small is the new big.
Yes, it does. But how can new regulations in policy, for example, the Google Analytics ban or the data transfer, how can this be enforced from the political side? Of course, there can be fines, but and smaller businesses using Google Analytics or website providers, that creates lots of uncertainties, so, for sure. But how will this be enforced from the policy side with the big players in tech like Google, like Meta, have a huge influence? Again, this points to lobbying, will it be enforced? How can this be? This is a difficult question and has lots of legal implications. I'm very well aware of that, but maybe anyone has an idea and we can exchange some ideas on that.
Well, like everything, it's going to be a combination of things. But one thing is big fines. And we are seeing some progress in that sense. The Gdpr fines have been multiplying by 7 in the past year, which is a good thing. So there was one fine against Amazon that was kind of worthy of being called a fine. Most fines are too small. So that's one thing. Another thing are lawsuits. And in the United States, class action lawsuits can weigh pretty heavily in these matters. So it's going to be a combination of things, and it takes time. That's something that's very frustrating, but it's just the way democracy works. Democracy is slow.
To take a more positive view, we should work.
Sorry.
Recently, I have been. I have had a very, for me at least, insightful exchange with an expert on integrity. And the question was how to instill integrity within our acting. Can it be learned? Can we learn it on an individual basis? Can we learn it on a corporate basis? Or even on a governmental basis, integrity? To fine people, to sanction people, to punish people is a system which is kind of, it works at the beginning, but it doesn't really attack the problem at the root. It's not a preventive problem, solution. It's like with corruption. You should prevent corruption, bribery, instead of dealing afterwards with the after effects. And the same goes for medicine, for healthcare. Predictive, prevention, the illness before it comes up. And you have to cure it. So it is what we have right now, sanctions, punishments, but on the long term, on the long run, it doesn't really work. And we see it on the corporate level. Change your philosophy. Don't fine people, don't punish them. You need to make them understand why it's not right. And even by law, it's at the first, it is really, you are afraid and you see the consequences, the trials, but try to change the point of view. And that's the hardest. That's ethical, again.
Thank you, Katja. I think we're coming almost to an end now. I'm not quite sure how much time we have left, but I'm pretty sure. Maybe to conclude and to wrap it up, all of you can have like one final statement that they want to end this talk, this discussion with. There's a lot of more to talk on, and but for now, a future outlook, your view on your take on things. Maybe Daniel, you would like to start?
Yeah, no, let me maybe follow up on the last statement, because I really think that people in all situations and all positions need to better understand what's at stake if we're talking about data protection, and to make or to think about that you could always change the role, like in the analogy of traffic, and it reminded me on people sitting in the car and always yelling about other people, but if they would think about the other people in traffic could be their child, maybe they would think differently. So that you keep in mind injuries which can come from data protection violations, and that you think about that the injured could be your weak child, for instance.
Thank you. What a great analogy. Not a very nice one, but a great one, and I think one that is very easy to relate to. Katja, would you like to go next?
Well, it is hard. It is hard because Daniel mentioned the look outside and see what consequences it can have. That's the consequentialist view on ethics. I would like to say, let's work on ourselves more individually. Let's realize that when it comes to privacy, we don't hide something, we protect something. And we protect it for a better good, for our good. And it is actionable. We are not doomed to be the victims. We are players in this game, in this chessboard game, where data is king and privacy is queen. And we are the hand. Positive.
Very positive. Excellent. Thank you, Katja. I like that a lot. Carissa, what do you think?
So one thing I would just like to echo Katja's point that ethicists have to be independent. If your job is on the line, you won't have enough freedom to actually speak your mind. And the ethicist is not a cheerleader. The ethicist is looking for trouble, is looking for what can go wrong. And I think a lot of companies don't realize this. They want, a team player with a team kind of shirt on, and that's part of it. But the critic is your friend, actually, because you want somebody who is friendly to you to tell you, where you're going wrong. So that's just like a parenthesis. The kind of big picture that I would like to leave is that currently much of the internet is being funded with a business model that depends on the systematic and mass violation of rights. And that's not normal. We shouldn't accept it. We shouldn't get used to it. And it can be changed, and we will change it, and we should change it. And ethics is about thinking about how we ought to live. What is a good life, and how do we get there? It's a very collaborative, and at the end of the day, everybody has in being ethical, because it leads to better relationships between one another and a better society. So companies will profit from being in stable democracies that are thriving, and they will profit from having employees that are happy to work there and that are proud to work there. And they will profit from having customers who trust the company and who trust it for good reasons. And so at the end of the day, we all have reasons to kind of row in the same direction and make sure we defend the liberal democracies that we value so much and that have given us such a rich life, and that we make sure that the next generation can likewise have as good a life as we've had, or hopefully better.
Thank you. What great and inspiring last words for this discussion. I really enjoyed having you all of you here, and I'm going into the rest of the day with a lot of inspiration and such joy, and a lot more to think about. Thank you all very much for being our guests. With that, I hope you all liked it as much as we did, or I hope you liked it too. And thank you. See you next time.